Hello my friends, it's Gabriel with the Last Huntsman channel here, and today we're going to be doing a more of a discussion type of video than a full-blown review. But today what I'm going to be discussing is knives for tactical use. And so like I said, this is going to be more of a discussion than a specific review of any kind of knife. But you know, to me, I'm going to point out some key things to look for a knife for, I guess, kind of a dual use survival / tactical knife, which, you know, things that you should look for to have if you decide to include a knife in your loadout. So I guess starting off with this video, I'm going to explain why I personally think that you should carry what, you know, a lot of people would consider like a survival knife among your tactical loadout. And you know, what I would consider a survival knife might be different than, you know, what a lot of other people would. And you know, I'm going to kind of explain a few things that I personally look for. Obviously, you know, one of the reasons why I wouldn't mind to actually carry a knife is because of the obvious utility use. You know, a knife is mankind's, you know, one of mankind's first tools. Like, you can do all your cutting and all that good stuff. But another reason why I would suggest carrying a knife amongst your tactical loadout is because, worst case scenario, that can be your last ditch weapon too. A knife was not only mankind's, you know, one of mankind's first tools, but it was also one of mankind's first weapons as well. And so, let's discuss what I look for with a survival / kind of tactical knife. Alright, so here I have just an entire array of knives, and most of these I would consider kind of from here over, I would consider your kind of tactical survival knives. And then these two are a couple examples of ones, you know, just to kind of show like things that I wouldn't suggest. And so, alright, so I'm going to explain some things for me personally, and I know I'm going to have all the so-called Navy SEAL keyboard warriors, you know, Ricky Recons all getting into the comments and saying blah blah blah, I don't know what I'm talking about and all that. Well, give a little bit of my experience. I've been an avid outdoorsman my entire life, and I've been a Marine infantry grunt. So, and I've taken some, you know, martial training throughout a good portion of my life. So, you know, I'm not going to say I'm the be-all, end-all, but I think I got a fairly decent experience on what I'm talking about here. So, we're going to discuss a few things of what you don't want with a survival / tactical knife, and what you do kind of want, or at least for me. So, I'm going to pick on Bear Force knives here a little bit. I really like this knife, and this is a great Bushcraft knife. This is their simple model, which is a great, like, you know, bushcrafty, just out in the fields camp knife and such. Now, one thing, you know, a couple things that you don't really want though with something that's a potential like survival tactical knife. And when I say that, you know, like I started this off with, this can be your potential weapon as well when I say that. And so, you know, you don't want something that is super round in your hand. And so this is where a lot of the bushcrafty guys might kind of take issues with some of my knife suggestions here, because, you know, most bushcraft knives just have these super comfortable rounded handles that you could just hold on to for hours on end, make your little fiddlesticks and spoons and stuff like that, which this is great for. That this knife is perfect for that type of stuff. But the problem that you don't want with a round handle is two major things. One, for edge alignment as you're making a strike. So like, say if you're using this in a weapons type platform, if it's a super round handle, it's hard to make a good strike with. And I'll show an example of a knife that would be better for that, because, you know, it's so round that you could be holding it off center and be striking like that and not really realize it because the handle is so round. The other thing about a really nice round handle, and you just see me do it, is that it could easily twist, and as you're striking something hard and, you know, adrenaline's pumping and all that good stuff, it can get twisted up in your hand, and because it's so round and smooth, it's kind of hard to even notice that. Now, another thing to take note on this knife as well, and, you know, I'm not picking on this knife particularly, I'm just using it as an example. There's absolutely no guard to that knife whatsoever. And if you know anything about like detective work or anything about police cases and stuff, anytime there's a like knife attack or a knife stabbing and they got a suspect, they always check their hands. And the reason for that is because a lot of people don't realize this, especially people with literally no martial training, but it's easy for your hand to slip into the edge. Of course, I'm wearing gloves and I'm being very, you know, careful here, but it's easy to slip into the edge yourself and actually injure yourself. So that wouldn't really necessarily be a great, you know, potential fighting knife if you could injure yourself with your own knife. Now, you know, another reason why I wouldn't necessarily suggest something like this is for like a gear loadout type of blade, is just because you want a knife that, in my opinion, can be fairly capable as well. I'll show another example of what not to look for. Is, you know, I'm going to pick on the Elty right here too, and this Elty right, I gave it a lot of high praise when I did the review on it, because, you know, it's a very capable knife. It's 3/16 thick, convex grind, big Kevlar style knife here. But there's a few things that I wouldn't necessarily suggest for it, for a potential loadout knife. One, it has a leather sheath, which obviously that could always be remedied, but it kind of suffers from the same issue as, even though it's not quite as round, it's a very round handle that is still easy to twist around in your hand. And if you guys look at one of my old videos, I had a Bark River, and I complained about the same thing, because they kind of tried to sell the Bark River Bravos especially as like a tactical knife potentially, and the handles are so smooth and so round that when I was using it for some like knife tactic type of stuff, it was constantly just twisting and turning in my hand so much that, to me, it doesn't really make it that great of like a potential tactical knife. And also, one other thing too about this is this one does have a guard, and it has a fairly deep guard, which is good, but it doesn't have anything to really like retain your hand. It's just a straight handle pretty much. That's why I have the lanyard on this one, is just because, you know, like when I was doing some chopping, I wanted something just to kind of keep it in hand. But so not only, in my opinion, should it have a guard, but it should have some kind of, you know, flared handle and kind of pommel hole to keep it in hand. Alright, so we're going to be talking about some knives that might be potentially good for not only like a survival, but survival tactical kind of loadout that you can keep on your gear and, you know, try to go out LARPing and try to pretend like you're a Betty Badass, I guess, right? But one I keep on my kit currently, and I have kept it on here for a while even though I kind of switch it around, is Top Silent Hero. Now, this knife, to me, actually has a lot going for it, not only as like a survival knife, but more so, in my opinion, a good tactical knife. Like, it doesn't have any extra flares and whistles or anything like that. It just has a broad blade. It's, you know, very slicey, definitely, but as you guys can see, it has a very deep guard. There is no way that knife is, your hand is not slipping up that knife blade at all. And I mean, it's almost borderline like miniature sword type of guard, and it comes even past your hand even. So like, it has probably one of the better type of guards that I've seen. But another thing to kind of take note on with this Highland Hero is that the handles, even though some people complain that they're kind of thin, which I got kind of medium, small, medium kind of hands, so to me it doesn't feel bad. But you'll notice the handles are fairly flat, which when using it as a weapon, that actually gives you a lot of sense of direction as to your edge. And so it's not going to like twist around in your hand, or you're going to hit like, you know, kind of with the flat, or kind of get off edge alignment. You actually have a lot of control over that edge, which, you know, a lot of people don't really think about that as far as like a fighting knife per se, but that's something to kind of look for with a potential whole tactical knife. Now, another couple things to kind of look for too is, you know, how well could it potentially stab? Like, obviously you don't want just like a big sharpened pry bar, you know. You want something kind of obviously well balanced and such that not only he can seem balanced as far as like blade and handle, but also just speed in hand. We'll take a look at a couple other examples that I would suggest. Alright, so I'm going to show just a few other examples that I would suggest. And now, like I said earlier, this ain't the like be-all, end-all list, but, you know, this is just a few that I would potentially carry on like my, you know, battle belt or chest rig or something like that. And one that I would really suggest would be the CM6. Sorry. The CM6, I think, is one of Esee's like very underrated blades. It's a very neat knife, but what's neat about it is it's one of Esee's only clip points, which a clip point, or, you know, some people would call them a Bowie knife, actually has a lot of merit. I mean, you know, you can trace the clip point going all the way back to even the Germans in medieval Europe with their messers and stuff. And so it was designed as a weapon that potentially could be a good utility knife. And as we can see, it has a pretty deep guard. The handles are fairly flat, and you know, just because it has flatter handles doesn't mean that it is necessarily not ergonomic. I mean, this one fits in my hand very well, and I've been using this some as for just like bushcraft and survival task too, and it does very well. Another one, I'm going to make a suggestion, and once again, this is kind of a clip point Bowie knife as well, is the Becker BK7. And the Becker BK7 was kind of designed as a combat knife. Like it definitely has that role, you know. And to me, basically anything that's a Bowie knife type design is gonna be a decent fighting knife, as long as it's designed well anyways. But this one doesn't necessarily have flat handles. However, it's more oval, and so you still have a very good sense of direction. And the way I like to grip it is I like to rest my thumb up and along that grip there, and so it's very easy to get a good sense of direction with this knife. Or you could even use the thumb ramp, which some people like, some people doesn't. But it also has a exposed tang pommel there, and you know, that right there, that's quite an attitude readjustment. And not only is that, you know, a tool, that could be a striking weapon as well. And, you know, I should backtrack a little bit. Even though it doesn't have an exposed tang pommel, this CM6 actually has a pretty kind of come to a point pommel as well. Now, another one I'm going to suggest and this is kind of more for someone that's on a budget, but I think honestly everybody should have one of these as just a backup, or it's just generally a good knife in general, in my opinion. But Cold Steel SRK, I have actually really come to like this knife. Mine has a little bit of wear on it. I'm still using it pretty regularly, but this knife, for the money, I think is one of the best knives you can buy. I mean, I still find these pretty regularly for sub $50, which, I see a lot of guys talking about knives under $100 and under $50 and stuff like that. But this one would be one of my top ones I'd pick for in that price range, honestly. Now, this one's a bit different. Obviously, it doesn't have micarta or G10 scales like some of my other ones. It just has a craton handle, and it does look fairly squared, but however, with it being squared, it is very ergonomic. You get a very good sense of direction. Once again, has a clip point, which kind of brings that point towards more of the center of the blade and such. And so you have a very good sense of direction. And also, the craton handles, they are very, they're more comfortable to the touch compared to some of these, especially with it being cold out and such. The craton handles are pretty nice. Now, the pommel here is not obviously as utilitarian as far as smashing, giving someone an attitude readjustment to the face or something like that. But, it still would do the trick. It's just probably not going to take the abuses, something like this. One more thing to take note on with these craton handles is they actually, don't slip at all. Even these micarta scales or texture G10 like that has, you'll get a little bit of slippage even, no matter what. But these craton handles, they don't have literally any slippage whatsoever, which I think is pretty great. And I mean, if I could go back to the Marines and I could say, hey, pick your, USMC K-bar or pick a Cold Steel SRK, I honestly, knowing what I would know now, would probably pick the SRK even over my USMC K-bar. Now, another one I'm going to make a suggestion on is the Blackjack Tacops 6. Now, this one is one that a lot of people hasn't really heard much on. And I honestly don't think that they promoted this knife in the way that it should have been promoted. I actually think this knife has a lot going for it, but it's they just didn't market it very well. So I don't think these are being produced anymore. But as you guys can see, this is kind of a Bowie harpoon modified. Has a full convex grind on it. It's very nice. Has, flat handles. Doesn't really have an exposed pommel or anything. But, I mean, it's a solid hunk of steel and micarta. It's going to give an attitude readjustment no matter what. But as you guys can see, I'm kind of a Bowie / harpoon clip point kind of guy. Now, that being said, I got a couple Tantos. Those would do very well as well. I just personally like a Bowie / kind of drop point harpoon kind of shaped knife just because I feel that they're a little bit more usable as far as utility task. However, that's all personal preference too. If you like a spear point, go with the spear point. If you like, Tanto, I know, going back to the SRK a little bit, they got the Recon Tanto. I have that one. I didn't bring it out with me, but, I personally kind of prefer a clip point. But if you like a Tanto, by all means, go with a Tanto. But we'll go on to the final one that I'd make a good suggestion on. And that is the SE6. Now, it's my only drop point one. Now, I kind of have, a little bit of reservations on a drop point because I don't think they're as good as far as stabbing and thrusting as a clip point. just because the tip is kind of more flared off to this end of the knife instead of more centered, which if it's more centered, it's kind of a little more easy to direct as far as your thrust goes. But the SE6 is still pretty good. It's still a solid choice, and you know, like I said, a lot of this is just personal preference. So, you know, I've carried the SE6. I even carried it while I was in the Marines. It was kind of the BK7 and the SE6. I've had these for a long time. I started kind of carrying them while I was in the military instead of my K-bar, even for a while, just because, you know, obviously I wasn't super pleased with the K-bar in some ways. But and I just started kind of, at that point, I was kind of learning a lot more about knives and knowing what to carry and what not to carry. But the SE6 has always been a good staple. Now this one, I got the Knife Connection G10 grips. I actually don't, like, while these grips are very comfortable and they're great in hand, I actually think the original, just factory SE6 grips would probably make it a better fighting knife per se, because these are kind of round. Even though they are oval, I just don't think they're quite as good on your direction and edge alignment as, like, say, the BK7 grips or even some of these other ones. But still, this would be a fairly decent tactical knife. Alright, we'll get back out here now, and I'll be all cooped up in my little shack. But, you know, a couple other things to kind of take note on too is, for something that I'm going to keep on my, like, gear, for sizing, and this is just personal preference, I know, but I personally kind of prefer something in the, like, 5 to 7 inch range. And it's just because, to me, that's a good size to not only be a decent sized survival knife, if, like, this comes down to your, like, you know, one tool that you got, but also, you know, it's a good size that I could have some decent standoff with. You know, I could actually kind of keep some distance and do some pretty decent heavy strikes too. And I also wouldn't suggest something much larger than that. You know, I would say the 5 to 7 inch range is ideal. You get much larger than that, and it's going to start, one moment, it's going to start interfering with all your other gear, because obviously the knife is just one tool out of many things. And so, you know, if you got, like, some 10 inch, you know, huge Rambo knife, then, you know, it could interfere with you moving around. It could get in the way of drawing your pistol. It could get in the way of presenting rifle. And so, you know, to me, I think the good, like, 5 to 7 inch range, and this is just my personal preference, and, you know, I'm just redneck out in the woods that's a Marine infantry grunt, so, you know, whatever, right? I'm sure all the keyboard warriors know a lot more than me, right? But that being said, that's my personal preference as far as sizing. Alright, one little side note too. One thing that I do not suggest with your potential survival tactical knife to potentially put on your loadouts is, I do not suggest having serrated edges. Now, I know, to me, I think that was kind of a fad for a while, was serrated edges, and you need serrated edges to cut through cordage and seat belts and stuff like that. But I've shown several times on my channel that you can cut all that material stuff just as good with a good sharp, you know, decent grind angle and all that, had just plain edge. But the reason why I also mainly suggest a plain edge over a serrated edge is mainly because of maintenance. Now, out in the field, when you got your just hand sharpeners and stuff like that, if you know, if you're using your knife quite a bit, especially for utility stuff, and that's another little side note, is serrated edges really kind of suck for most utility tasks, versus a plain edge is obviously great for that. But also, you know, when you have to maintain the edge, it's very easy to maintain just a basic plain edge, versus a serrated edge usually takes some kind of special sharpener and sharpening rods and stuff like that, which is just more shit to have to carry, which obviously most people can't carry that. Well, my friends, I hope this video was kind of informative. It's not my normal, typical reviews, but it's something that I've thought about for a while. And, you know, I've done some, you know, knife combative training and martial arts, and I actually even did competitive sword fighting at one point. So, you know, and you know, also I've been in the military and stuff. So I feel like I had some decent insights on this particular topic. So I hope my advice and, you know, some of my suggestions as far as knives to kind of pick out helps you all out. You know, at least bare minimum, you could look cool while LARPing with her airsoft gear and stuff, right? But be prepared, both physically and spiritually. God bless, and carry on.